Before we get started, I'd like to clarify any misconceptions regarding the concept of yoga as it pertains to this topic, meditation, which I believe the author does make an attempt to draw some lines of distinction between any idea that it is a religion versus a component or process. Welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. Hopefully, you've been enjoying this book titled The Secret of Meditation by Hans Rieker. If you are new to my channel, glad you found me. Make sure to visit my playlist where you will find the first two videos of this three-part series. In order to understand this a bit, I did a brief search and learned that the earliest exposure of yoga in the United States came through Indian teachers and thinkers who traveled to America towards the end of the 1800s. Interest began circulating after Swami Vivekananda gave his speech at the World Parliament of Religion in Chicago in 1893, where he spoke about Indian philosophy and yoga. And the earliest appearance of the term yoga was in the Vedas, which are some of the oldest sacred texts in India, dating back to around 1500 to 500 BC, forming the foundation of Hindu spiritual, philosophical, and cultural traditions. I believe that for us in the West, there may still be some vague understanding of what yoga is because it seems to encompass a lot of things. One of them is the component of meditation. And as I've mentioned, yoga has spiritual roots, but is not necessarily a religion, which a lot of people get confused with spirituality and a religious belief. There's two different things. You can be spiritual and not be part of a religion, and but you can be religious and spiritual. Anyway, yoga can be practiced as a secular discipline. And yes, meditation is often integrated into yoga practices, such as in Raja Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, and some Hatha Yoga traditions. These practices include physical postures, breathing exercises, as well as meditation techniques to help achieve mental clarity and spiritual growth. However, meditation can also be practiced independently of yoga as a standalone technique for relaxation, mindfulness, and mental focus. Yoga's spiritual and religious roots goes back to ancient India, as I said, particularly in the religions of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. We see with yoga the same fate that has happened with some of the best components of ancient cultures that we have as a human race discarded what no longer serves us or serves the mind of the present human, and we begin to polish it or improve it so that that which is true and that which endures the test of time is what we take with us. And hence the yoga of current times is widely practiced as a secular activity focused on the physical health, the flexibility, and the mental well-being without any religious connotations. Additionally, as a point of interest, just to emphasize how the understanding of what yoga is or is not, we can see it in a 2021 legal action taken by Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, who signed legislation lifting a 30-year ban on yoga in public K through 12 schools, allowing it as an elective. The law permits yoga for physical fitness, but restricts it to secular instruction, forbidding chanting, mantras, guided meditation, and even namaste greetings. And parents must sign permission slips. If you're interested in looking at the details of this legislation, it's HB 246 Alabama. I've left you a link in the description of this video. And also, there was debate in Missouri regarding taxation, where some argued that yoga's spiritual elements should be exempt from taxes. So whether spiritual, secular, or religious nature of yoga, if you have an interest in learning more, this video hopefully will bring some clarity, and if you are at the beginning stages of your yoga journey, you will find many useful components to enhance what you are doing now. For sure, I have found a few that the author brought up, and he actually posed some questions which I found to be challenging, specifically with anything that has to deal with me looking in, yet it's all part of the journey. even when it feels uncomfortable. And that's what's so beautiful about yoga. Even when you're sitting there in quiet contemplation, whether you're observing your breath or you are observing how your body is responding to maybe some tension and things like that, or as you're working through maybe some poses and you're watching your own limitations, it's really humbling. But before I turn the page, please do leave a comment. Let me know you are here. Where are you from? It's nice to know where this video travels to. And leave a like and share this with your friends, of course, especially if they love yoga. And now I turn the page. The classical objects of meditation. I shall now give a long list of objects of meditation which for various reasons are thought to be especially beneficial. However, such a list can never be exhaustive, nor is it needed at all, since it is not the number of objects which is important, but the intensity which we regard each one of them. There is nothing against choosing a matchbox, a handkerchief, or a pencil as an object of meditation, and no reason why, after a few weeks, we should not fare just as Agassi's pupil. Certain objects, however, are especially favorable, and what has proved to be beneficial to many generations may have favorable psychological consequences even today. Note well, consequences, for we are not concerned with the objects themselves, but only with their usefulness in meditation. Footnote: in the recognition of this fact lies the difference between Buddhist and Christian meditation. End of footnote. The choice of the right object is more important than the questionable ambition to have meditated upon as many objects as possible. Indeed, those who can meditate upon one object for some years will invariably be better off than those with many objects. After all that has been said, it is not necessary to give any reason for this. Or further, those who attain their goal by means of a unique object will have gained so much in wisdom that they will know spontaneously how to choose and act in the future. There can be no therapy without diagnosis, no development without clear recognition of what is underdeveloped. Those capable of turning the preparatory exercises into an education for concentration and then developing the latter to its peak, to meditation, will already have discovered so many of their inner needs and shortcomings that they will have no difficulty in choosing from the many objects at hand those which are best and most beneficial. We shall not simply accept that the traditional proven objects are some mysterious sort of medicine, for this could easily lead to a form of spiritual obscurantism or ill-founded mysticism, but we shall investigate their psychological origins the better to understand them. Footnote: this consideration too is a significant difference between Buddhism and the mystical expressions of all other religions. End of footnote. I do not wish to leave the choice unconditionally to the meditator and to what for the moment must be his whims, since it is always a comforting feeling to know that what we do is right. The inner certainty of being on the right path is an essential condition for meditation. The objects which we shall discuss can be divided into 6 groups. 3 groups of 10 objects each, 1 group of 4 objects, 1 group of 2 objects, and 1 somewhat special group. The first group of 10 is of a material nature and refers to the constituents of every form of matter. At first sight, this group appears incomprehensible, and we could easily mistake it for an aid to self-hypnosis. This is not the case at all, and we shall soon see what the true facts are. Let us look at the 10 objects of the first group. 1. Earth, in the form of a heap of sand. 2. Water, a bowl full. Air, in the sensation at the surface of the skin. 4. Fire, the flame of a candle. 5. A small round disc of blue color. 6. A small round disc of yellow color. 7. A small round disc of red color. 8. A small round disc of white color. 9. Light, falling through a small hole into a dark room. 10. Space, the open but finite heavenly vault. Not only the later texts of the Southern Buddhists, but even their modern exponents show how little they know of the applications of these so-called kasinas. It is true that these are often mentioned in the writings, but their meaning has been forgotten, and they are used haphazardly. However, this is by no means planned meditation, and the result, if there is one at all, is mostly a self-hypnotic kind. This is diametrically opposed to the true aim of meditation. The meaning of these kasinas is very simple and, for purposes of meditation, very practical. Earth, water, fire, and air are the famous 4 elements which, even today, indicate the forms of which matter is constituted: solid, liquid, or gaseous, and finally combining or changing from one form into the other, combustion. We found previously that we can only perceive matter in one of these forms. Thus, these 4 elements are the only perceivable forms of matter. For direct perception, there exists no other form. Blue, yellow, red, and white are not only the main colors of our conceptual world, but also those of the spectrum. Footnote. See also the color pyramid of J.H. Lambert, with the same basic colors. End of footnote. All visual perception presupposes light, just as space is the basic condition of form in general. Thus, these 10 kasinas represent the basic elements of our visual perception in a practical and understandable way. Here there is everything in which form can manifest itself. The first 4 represent solidity, the second 4 color, and the last 2 are conditions of perception. This is probably inadequate for scientific analysis, but it must be stressed that we do not perceive analytically. Without exception, everything surrounding us can be built up from these 10 basic elements. What is the rest? Merely appearance, composition, and form. These, however, are later and further objects of meditation. Suppose we have now chosen a material object of meditation. Sooner or later, while scrutinizing the object more thoroughly with our mind, we shall be able to resolve it into the above elements and say, I see an object in front of me. In order to discover its true essence, I must dissect it into its components. I must free myself from the many-sidedness of the objects and must take only a single one of its elements as an object of meditation. Whatever the element chosen, it can be found in our list, although sometimes a further resolution may become necessary. These elements are, of course, no absolute values in themselves, but in their essence, they are free of appearance and form. What we see in them leads to an immediate understanding of their absolute origin, without the confusion created by pictures and far-fetched interconnectedness concepts. This is clearly proven by the greatly difficulty we have in answering the questions: what is solid? What is fire? What is color? What is light? What is space? The answer is simple when we merely repeat what we have learned from books, but it is almost impossible when we wish to speak from our own experience. This is not only true in the case of these questions, for the truths of science, right though they may be, are mere prejudices as long as they have not been experienced by ourselves. This is difficult to achieve, but nevertheless possible in just the same intuitive manner in which it was experienced and recorded 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, not by magic, but by clear understanding, by clear concentrated thought, and by that absolute vision which is not free of thought, but freed from thought. Who can penetrate form with form? He who wants to cut glass needs a diamond. The second group of 10 must be treated with great care if we wish to derive the greatest possible benefit from them. It is the so-called contemplation of corpses in 10 different stages of decay. Well, we have spoken of this before. The Occidental has a different attitude to the dead body from the Oriental, and from the Hindu especially. and we cannot safely ignore this. On the other hand, we must be considerate in our criticism, for before accusing those who choose these decaying and crumbling parts of the corpses as objects of meditation of bad taste, or even worse, as we often do thoughtlessly, we should think of the doctor whose blessed work involves just such bad taste. Though this may shake us to our very core, it is nevertheless a natural phenomena, and those who do not wish to see it, nobody will blame them, should not be blind to such eternal facts. The contemplation of corpses is less for the purpose of realizing that after death everything must decay, but rather to show the exact opposite, that what decays cannot possibly be everything. It is a contribution to man, know thyself, rather than a memento mori. We do not want to enter into any theoretical discussions here, as in any case it is only the physicians amongst us who could practice this kind of meditation, and fantasy meditation would be senseless since its results could not correspond to true corpse meditation. Even effigies would by no means fulfill the purpose. But perhaps all this is to the good, for since on Asiatic fields of carnage I have seen the pitiless alternatives of the consistent meditation of corpses, sanctity or madness, I know that just here it is only the greatest of care and the wiser inner direction by a great teacher which can lead to positive results. There are teachers of meditation, especially in the South Buddhistic school, who use the contemplation of corpses as a proof of the fact that all beauty is skin deep and that it passes away with the process of decay. There are even whole textbooks of meditation which try to make this point. Without too much discussion, we simply want to contend it is certainly not beauty which decays, but only that which served as its vessel. Beauty is immortal, as long as there is but one being left to experience it. It is not found in decaying matter, which is but a transmitter of beauty, but only where it is immortal, in our own hearts. The third group of 10 is a measure house of abstract objects, which are all of the strongest psychological and character-forming value. 1. Buddha. We have already spoken of the value of a small figure of this material embodiment of self-reflection. Whether we are Christians or Buddhists, we simply consider the Buddha as a symbol of all we mean to reach through meditation and connected ways of developing. In choosing him as an object of meditation, we choose ourselves simultaneously, i.e., that ourselves which is our goal when cleansed of all present faults. This only the Buddha can symbolize. He is the answer to the question, what is the goal of meditation? All that is form in his statue is insignificant. What matters is the effect. Perhaps peace, perhaps a smile. For this peace and this smile will one day fill us, but it will not be the peace nor the smile of a worthless statue, a worthless body, a worthless work of art. The picture, the body, the work of art will one day decay. The peace and the smile, however, will have become our imperishable possessions. This is the Buddha in us, and meditation will have reached its goal. 2. The teaching of the Buddha. It is not necessary at this stage, indeed it might even be dangerous, to immerse oneself in great mountains of thick books and to accumulate knowledge through research. The entire teaching of Buddha can be given in 12 words. Avoid what is evil, do what is good, and purify the heart. Please do not say this is ridiculously little. Which single one of us can, at the end of his life, say that he has fulfilled these requirements? My religion commands just that, said another. Certainly, nobody has said that your religion is wrong. All praise to him who says, these 12 words are much too much all at once. Give me only a part of them. He may have them. The first 5 counsels, not commandments, of the Buddha are 1. Never kill or damage, even spiritually, a single living being. 2. Do not take what is not yours. 3. Be pure in thoughts, words, and deeds. 4. Do not lie. 5. avoid intoxicants, i.e. things which cloud clear thinking. And for those who think that they can easily fulfill these, here is an eightfold path to deliverance. 1. Right attitude. Create a clear picture of the world of life and of that which you call yourself. 2. Right decision. Decide to go along the path which may lead you to your true enlightened self. 3. Right speech. Do not create suffering through thoughtless words, for he who creates suffering must bear the consequences of such suffering. 4. Right acts. Act consciously, for only then can you judge whether your actions are good or evil. 5. Right way of life. Fulfill the demands of the day with a pure heart. He who howls with the wolves becomes a wolf himself. 6. Right aims. Do not aim at things which will create suffering for you or for others. Delusion is short, regrets are long. 7. Right concentration. Do not approach things with prejudice, nor with avarice or hatred. 8. Right meditation. Truth is deeper than your prejudice can imagine. The recognition of truth means deliverance from suffering which surrounds you everywhere, and which threatens you daily and hourly. Here we have so deep an object of meditation that our life is hardly long enough to plummet. He who thinks that this, in any way, contradicts his own religion must have misunderstood something very fundamentally, either in the teachings of the Buddha or in his own religion. Footnote. At this point, I must stress that I am not attempting to give a complete idea of the teaching of the Buddha in this book that would go far beyond the given framework. If here I speak of this doctrine as an object of meditation without going into details, then the reader may consider the following. Buddhism is not a philosophy which primarily contends that it changes the intellectual world picture. It is a practical way of enlightenment which, through morals, wisdom, and inner reflection, leads man back to his true sources away from avarice, hatred, and prejudice. The above-mentioned counsel lead to this directly. What we have said corresponds completely and immediately with the doctrine of Buddha, although I have not used his words. If, however, the given objects of meditation are taken out of their framework and are then considered to be incomprehensible, something basic has been misunderstood. If the connection with the whole is seen, more of the doctrine of Buddha has been understood than long dissertations would have permitted. Why did I avoid canonical words? In order to avoid a cult with poorly translated words, and to give instead their hidden meaning, which alone is capable of conveying to us how relevant this wisdom is to our life and times, even if some will persist in calling it strange and purely Asiatic. End of footnote. 3. The monastic community of Buddha. Here, I grant you, we have a classical object of meditation which cannot be used in its original sense by Western man because he fails to grasp it. I should have omitted it completely if it could not be adapted for our purposes at all, i.e., to reflecting on our inner reactions while thinking of a life completely shut off from the outer world. Could I lead the life of a pious hermit? If not, why not? This question is not meant to prepare us for the life of a monk, but it is often in the strangest questions that the most significant answers are hidden. Since the life of a monk is the result of consistent inner development, in any case it is meant to be, the answer can tell us many things about what we still lack in our development for progress to the point where we could lead the life of a hermit if we wanted to or had to. For a monk does not go to the monastery because he cannot stand the world any longer. Woe to him if he does it for this reason, but only because he is beyond it. It no longer holds him in chains. We who wish to enjoy the world for a long time yet have also decided to cast off our chains, for how else could we be happy? Who could, for instance, be happy in a marriage while he considers it a form of bondage? Here we have an object of meditation which, let us recall the first chapter, leads us to the question of possessions and also to our true attitude towards them. This group of 10, in its first object, the Buddha, poses the question of our inner self. In the second object, the doctrine, we have the question of the capacity of the self. In the third object, the monastic life, we have the question of the attitude of this self to the environment, analyzed in the first group of 10. In the second group of 10, the contemplation of corpses, it would have been recognized that the body is only of secondary importance in our search for the self. Thus, we have a clear sequence, which is more useful the more consistently it is observed. We cannot observe it in the theoretical ideal way, but we shall find a path which, although longer, is less dangerous to the soul. 4. Morals. Suggestion for an irreproachable moral life are found in the first 5 counsels of Buddha, in parts 3, 4, and 5 of the Eightfold Path, but also in the 3 main elements of active morals, such as right speech, right action, and right living, and in the 52 factors of consciousness investigated in the chapter The Philosophy of the Thought Content. Only the thoughtless will smile when asked, "Why shouldn't you kill? Why shouldn't you steal?" If he laughs at so naive a question, ask him why. He'll soon stop laughing. There are many reasons, but each less satisfactory than the next, because it is forbidden by law, because God punishes it, etc. Why does he punish it? Because it is an evil deed. Why is it an evil deed? What is evil? Are there absolute, generally valid definitions of good and evil? He who drives himself into a corner by constant questioning until he can no longer find a reasonable answer to a reasonable question has arrived at the beginning of meditation. To ask somebody else would be wrong, for it would not only delay knowledge, but mislead us. We cannot become wise through the wisdom of others. Those who maintain without self-enlightenment that they couldn't kill, steal, lie, etc., are the victims of one of the most dangerous prejudices, for not one of us knows a priori what lies dormant within us. Many of us had to recognize this when, in the horror of war, they were confronted with the fact of a changed self. Anyone who has experienced this is more careful with the contention. I don't need such moral laws, for in this respect, I, for one, am irreproachable. Certainly, our dynamic will may be irreproachable. Is it the same in the sphere of our inherited characteristics? If it were so, it would be easy to predict the future life and character of the newly born. Those who base necessity for morals on the demands of the social order will certainly find themselves at a dead end, for they forget that such demands can change overnight into their very opposites when it is a dictator who makes the social laws. In that case, under the guise of moral demands, a whole people can become the victims of the changing whims of a single man. No, we must try to discover a basic law which is just as binding for the savage in the jungle as it is for the Pope. This does not mean be good, but become better. It does not involve knowledge, but enlightenment. It is not so much the point of view which is important as the path of development, not the being free, but the becoming freer. Therefore, to be moral means to be self-satisfied, but to become moral means rising to higher levels. This law is universally valid. 5. Generosity. Generosity is determined firstly by the degree of our dependence on things, and secondly on how much we understand and feel the needs of others. Generosity determines the measure of our own worth, either present or to be developed. For, and this we must accept without comment, the sages of all nations and of all the times have praised generosity as one of the virtues capable of leading to greatness. Later on, we shall find a very closely related group, compassion and sharing the joy of others, where we shall enter more closely into our inner relationship with our fellow men. 6. God. It is important to be clear about what is understood by God. It is obvious that the word itself is insufficient. Indeed, that it can be interpreted in many different ways. Therefore, we must be clear about the source of the value of this experience. I fully agree with those who will here say indignantly, God is not a fit subject for thought. For quite some time I have not spoken of thinking, but of self-elevation above thinking, through immediate experience. Christ said, "Unless ye be as a little child." And he promised the kingdom of heaven to the poor in spirit. To attain this is the purpose of this book, even though the method is a little unusual, indeed, even though a strange religion must offer its principle for this purpose. Here, too, through thought, we want to pass beyond thinking into experience, just as in church, just as at a concert, just as in true love. This is God meditation. To the naive Christian, this is merely confusing, for he customarily approaches the concept of God with dynamic thought. But this is nothing but the atrophy of his experience of God, an experience completely alien to him. After all, it is unreasonable to expect the average Christian to penetrate the depths of experience, as did the Church Fathers. Certainly, he could do so, but in the first place, he would have to be clear about what he understands by God, at least on whether he sees him from the point of view of the prophet or of the mystic, since the contemporary conception of God is a vague mixture of both. The God concept plays a predominant role in the consciousness of the greater part of humanity. It may therefore neither be ignored nor underestimated. We shall touch upon this theme again in the chapter called Meditation in Christianity. 7. Inner harmony. This is perhaps the most beautiful, the purest, and the simplest object of meditation, with comparatively the most far-reaching and yet the most simple experiences. It is the thought which is insolubly connected with the concept of meditation, a thought which must arise whenever we think of meditation, whenever the first preparations for daily meditation have been made. It is the thought which makes the strongest and the most real contribution to the peace of the world, for it is only the peace in the heart of man himself which is capable of preventing war. Without this inner peace, there would be, and there is, no meditation, and those who have used it throughout life as the only object of inner contemplation have happily fulfilled the demands of their religion, whatever it be. 8. Death. Again, we meet death, and again in a different context. At our first meeting, we asked him, what is the body and what happens to it? In the contemplation of corpses, we asked, what is the self and where is it to be found? Here we desire the knowledge of what is death. Here it shall and will lose its horror. This form of meditation is the best antidote against the sorrow produced by the death of a dear friend. Wouldn't it be a wonderful memory to have seen the friend die with a smile, with a wink, with a goodbye? Meditation of death will give us the certainty that death is only a process of transition. It would be senseless to waste any words on what during meditation becomes a certain conviction, and what would here only appear as cheap consolation from who is at a distance from the sufferer. However, everyone is a sufferer, since death knocks at everyone's door. Those who do not wish to probe any deeper would not even benefit if the great truth of this meditation were described to them. And those also who only enter into this meditation out of curiosity will be disappointed. Questions about death must not be idle, but must spring from the heart. Death remains the same, but its picture becomes purer and stranger. It becomes beautiful. A world is revealed which is incomparably more dignified and holier than ours, for in it nothing is sad or gloomy. 9. Observation of the body. Observation of the body has been discussed before, but it was not treated deeply since it belongs to pure meditation. It is easier than one thinks possible to meditate about the inner parts of one's body, and those who manage to do so will soon be able to progress to the meditation of bodily functions. Meditation of the body is closely related to the meditation of corpses, and is meant to prove that more lies behind the functional process than the mere workings of a first-class motor. In any event, we are convinced of this somehow, but We only experience it very rarely, i.e., only when we recognize the thing behind it by its effect. Nevertheless, we want to look for it too, and what we said by way of preface about concentration on the body, feeling, thinking, etc., becomes more profound here and leads to a goal which leaves no question and no doubt. For here we are concerned with the riddle of our own self and our own soul. 10. Breathing. It is just the same with this last object of the abstract group of 10. Here too we have prepared, through concentration, what will now be retraced to its abstract spiritual sources. Here there is no longer any counting or feeling, but only breathing. We do not think or do anything else. We simply breathe. One knows that there is breath, but no more thoughts arise. There is only breath, and then not even breath. But this can only be understood by those who have tried it patiently, who have experienced it, who do not expect any miracles, who do not expect anything at all, who have gained the great inner peace. The next main group of classical objects of meditation consists of only 4 elements, which are all concerned with our inner attitude to our fellow men. 1. Goodwill. 2. Compassion for others. 3. Sharing the joy of others. 4. Happy equanimity. These 4 are of such infinite importance that we can say that they determine our relations with humanity in general. 1. Goodwill. What we have here called goodwill is actually much more than that. It is a love of living creatures of such depth as is only known to us in mother love. It is free of every sensual desire, which, after all, is nothing else than selfishness. The best mark of what this goodwill signifies internally is the well-known formula, usually found at the end of many Buddhist texts: peace to all beings. This is more than a manner of speech. It is something deeply felt. Those who do not feel this deeply every minute of the day act against the tenets of every religion, their own most of all. Test your own attitude to it. Go through the list of your enemies and ask yourself if you begrudge happiness to any of them. If this is so, then a change is imperative. For to wish luck to those who we love is hardly a great deed. We must prove ourselves through our enemies, but not by destroying them, but by making them our friends. This cannot and shall not happen by a displacement of our hatred and by lying to ourselves, but by considering those as brothers who, too, are the sons of a mother, who are just as hurt by the misfortune which you wish upon them as your mother would by yours. If your enemy is truly an evil man, he will have, now or later, to suffer for it, and he will feel his suffering no less than you feel yours. But haven't we heard time after time how evil man has found the path to righteousness through the love of others? How easily man becomes guilty unintentionally, yet without being evil. And how easy is it then to break a staff over him, instead of taking his hand sympathetically and taking him to one's heart. In true despair, we are always alone. And if then we cannot find some small corner of our heart to hold on to, we are often lost. Do you know whether your enemy does not despair in his own heart? But we do not wish to dispense charity magnanimously. We only want to understand our brother. This is something quite different from the unjust charity of the self-satisfied Pharisee. Those who begin with prejudice are certain to get lost and to become the victims of their own words. Goodwill, however, does not begin with goodwill itself. It begins, as all our meditation does, with testing and with questioning. Every question should uncover the good, look for its roots, and this we know from the factors of consciousness free us from the negative factors, since otherwise there could be no meditation at all, but at most some form of planned brooding. This meditation requires nothing else than our willingness to do good. All questions arising from this Why be good? What is good? How good? How do I find it difficult to be good, etc.? Are to be answered during concentration. And if the answers are found there, then we shall choose them as objects of meditation. For an intellectual understanding, even if it is concentrated, has by no means changed us inside. This can only be done by meditation. The result of this meditation, let us unashamedly call it meditation of the love of man, is equivalent to the radiant mood of a Sunday morning in spring. It is happiness. If this happy feeling is not there, then our love for man is not yet genuine. 2. Compassion. The second element of our main group cannot be fulfilled without fully developing the previous group. As long as we can still say, thank God this hasn't happened to me, when something unpleasant has happened to somebody else, we shall have far to go. Indeed, only when we say, I'd rather this have happened to me, for I could have borne it better, have we obtained one of the aims of meditation. Mr. Miller objects, not unexpectedly. Now he wants me to worry about the cares of others, as if I didn't have enough of my own. Believe me, Mr. Miller, you won't get rid of your worries more quickly by not caring about the unhappiness of your fellow beings. Now Mr. Miller will become aggressive. Well, will I lessen them by being sorry for everybody? Dear Mr. Miller, do you know what it means to have somebody who understands us when we are in pain, in despair, and apparently without a way out? Who merely understands? Do you know what it means to be such a man oneself? Do you know what consolation, what power, what will to life you are in a position to give through your compassion, through your true understanding? And do you know what incredible forces you derive from doing so yourself? No, you do not know it, for otherwise you would not have asked the question. But when you do come to know it, then you will have managed to leave many, indeed, an infinite number of your own cares behind. Do you ask how that is possible? You will know it when you have made somebody happy through your sympathy. Never forget that it makes a great deal of difference whether you just moan with somebody or whether you truly stand by his side. 3. Sharing the joy of others. Envy is simply being angry at being left out of the happiness of others. We're always willing to share this, but only if we are ready to share their suffering also will we be able to partake of their good fortune. This is one of the most beautiful laws of nature. Thus we can see that from human love there arises human compassion. From human compassion, the ability to share the joy of others, and this almost looks like a reward which, although is never given away, is nevertheless easily earned. 4. Equanimity. Here we might just as well speak of a still and considered happiness. Still means undisturbable, considered means above any influence, and happiness is the best word for that contentment of the wise which rests in itself and is born out of itself. Equanimity is never up in the clouds, nor is it weary to death. It moved on the path which has ever been known to all the sages of both East and West as the surest and the best path to the goal. The golden mean between too high and too low. No suffering can shatter this equanimity, yet never will its owner flee from suffering like a coward. He is not lifted up into the clouds, and yet he knows how to value this happiness and how to feel it. Since his life receives a greater share of it than that of the ordinary man, happiness becomes both a source of strength and a shield through which the arrows of suffering can no longer penetrate. However, equanimity, such as Socrates is reported to have had, cannot be experienced without human love, without the corresponding compassion, nor yet without joy at the happiness of others. In meditation, the decision to pass from one group to the next is made at that moment when we have the happy feeling of fulfillment in contemplation. If this is done intellectually, it could only too easily happen that our love of man becomes an advertisement of our own goodness, which changes compassion into a shedding of crocodile tears, the sharing of joy into the sharing of enjoyment, and the equanimity into indifference. One false thought, and positive is changed into negative, and what we want to avoid will now break over us without pity. This is the danger of the path to salvation. If you try to walk along it deceitfully and ambitiously, you will be pitilessly stoned by your own weakness. Then there will be no forgiveness. This is the law of nature. However, if you walk along it with a pure heart, you will never be disappointed. After having discussed what may be called our spiritual and mental nourishment, the next main group, consisting of two parts, approaches a new angle of the old problem, our physical nourishment. Behind this, we need not look for a great purpose, nor see in it any great aim, as we did in the last group of four. We only wish to create a clear attitude to this essential process. Our inner attitude to food needs clarifying, since the importance of nourishment is obviously of the greatest importance to the life process. Many have made a cult of the simple process of eating, and have thus made it a useless end in itself. One of the greatest achievements of our culture is that it concerns itself with the question of nourishment. Nothing in this is of greater value than the requirement that this natural process should become an act of pleasure. A clean table, a meal prepared with love, a peaceful and happy way of eating. All this is so beautiful, so natural a need, that those who have learned to value it and are often then forced to do without have to sacrifice more than mere etiquette. For cleanliness of physical food is not a bit less important than cleanliness of spiritual and mental food. This need for cleanliness in the three nourishments has nothing to do with snobbery, as long as it springs from need rather than from any intellectual principle. Thoughtfulness in taking in these three forms of nourishment follows the same law. Here too, as everywhere, it is essential to become absolutely clear why this is so. It is commonplace to answer because it is healthier, but is a circle only round because it is not square? Because it is healthier is a good and correct answer, but it reminds one of the medicine and not of natural necessity. Who, when doing something pleasant, would first ask whether he is healthy enough? Thus we read the newspaper while eating because it is pleasant enough, though it is not healthy. It would be healthy to chew each bite 32 times, but since this is not pleasant, we only chew it 6 times, so that we may taste the pleasure of the next bite as soon as possible. No, we do not demand cleanliness of nourishment and a cult of eating because it is healthier, but only because somehow its pleasantness makes us happy. Everybody tries to eat in as pleasant a manner as possible, and those who do it in an unhealthy way only do so because they have not yet experienced how much more pleasant is a carefully prepared meal than a hasty, unclean one, or else because they look for pleasure in perversity. Cleanliness is not the privilege of the rich, any more than is thoughtfulness. The happiness of a quiet, thoughtful taking in of nourishment is a lasting feeling, even if it has no immediate beatific effect. It is beautifully simple. We do not think of 1,001 other things, but concentrate and occupy ourselves only with what is on the plate, on the fork, in the mouth, and in the stomach. Here the process of eating, the taking up of nourishment, is chosen as the object of meditation, while the second member of this group is concerned with nourishment as such. In the latter, it is important to become aware of how our physical nourishment is composed of solid and liquid particles, how we overestimate it and get into bondage instead of entering into a wise relationship of reciprocity with it. Here, as everywhere, we look for the deeper meaning. We will realize that it is not the material which is decisive. Indeed, that the material part of physical nourishment is only what the alphabet is to mental nourishment, the carrier of meaning but worthless in itself. It is necessary only as a means. We shall be faced with the question, What is the content? Again, we shall realize that the answer is to be found only in our experience. What previously appeared to be a purely physical need will suddenly gain an inner significance with deeper understanding. Our greed, however, will abate. Thus, does eating itself become a part of religion because religion is not empty piousness, but the experience of life? In the canonical list of classical meditation objects, there now follows the last main group, abstract deep meditation. This main group is completely out of place here. It is not meant for those who want to immerse themselves in their own spiritual basis, but for those who are already in it. Here we should not know what to do with it. In it, there are no concepts, no reasonable points of departure, and even if we knew vaguely what it might be about, we should be completely incapable of understanding it from its true content. Therefore, we must be patient for a little. In the chapter Deep Meditation, we shall return to this group, and then we shall be able to understand it, at least to some extent. The choice of objects. We have previously stated that the choice of a suitable object, suitable in the sense of psychological needs, is one of the most important requirements. We must be extremely careful in this choice, for it is not only the intellectual but also the psychological, and therefore not obvious, data which are of decisive importance. Thus, the right choice of object is almost a matter for meditation in itself. It is not possible to give a universal formula, just as a doctor cannot prescribe by rote, but must judge the needs of each individual patient. So we too can do no more than give general indications to those who wish to follow the path most suitable for them. We all want different things, yet we shall all recognize our common aim one day. This does not mean that our paths must be identical. Some people have traveled around half the earth to find it, and some live but a stone's throw from it and do not know it. Unfortunately, the old texts are not always reliable, since most of them were written at a time when extremely keen investigators and commentators placed more value on the written word than on the source of their own experience. They relied on the words of the ancients, adding their own opinion, omitting apparent side issues which, however, were later found to be of great importance. If a skeptical and experienced practitioner looks at these writings today, he will discover much that is wrong, and much that is mere padding. Thus today we can only rely on the texts, however old and reverent conditionally. And since ours is not critical but absolutely practical work, only that text will do which will help us forward rather than arrest us through its imperfections. Therefore we shall not bother about text, and if we miss much wisdom on the way, we shall not deny that it is there. Footnote. For the expert, I wish to say briefly, those passages which I consider questionable are mainly in Buddhaghosa's, Visuddhimagga, and also in the last part of Anurupa's, Abhidhamma Sangaha. In other words, in texts of the later Theravada. While practical investigation into meditation seems to have been abandoned in them, it revived at that in later times in the countries of the Mahayana. This can be seen from the entire sutra literature. End of footnote. If a melancholic person broods over his misery, he is sure to become even more miserable, instead of recognizing his misery as unfounded. He lacks the physical conditions for this recognition. To gain these, he must first have passed through other stages of thought. Melancholy, as every other wrong attitude, is due to a false mental starting point. Perhaps the melancholic knows this is in theory, but he is incapable of creating other thought processes in practice, since logical calculation, though it may lead to intellectual results, never leads to spiritual ones. He knows his difficulties, believes that they're based on a wrong philosophy, but since belief without experience is barren, this dead knowledge is at best confusing and never useful. And if we who are more life positive say, it is silly always to be thinking of death, this may well be due to our experience, but not his. what is experienced can only be shaken by some stronger experience. Meditation follows the same law as every other therapy. It does not consider it important to remove the effects of false attitudes or to prevent further false conclusions. It desires to and must attack the very roots of those wrong attitudes, and in order to bar new eruptions, it must prepare the ground on which weeds cannot even start to grow because there is no food for them. The choice of objects must be determined by this consideration. Compared with the time devoted to the contemplation of a chosen object, much too little time and care is usually given to the choice of object itself. There are men in Asia who reflect on one object for decades, and should we do the same? It is only logical to spend at least 1 month on choosing the object carefully and on convincing ourselves of its rightness and importance. Meditation on death in all 3 degrees of contemplation may only take place after we have, by preliminary meditation, carefully determined if there are no depressive or melancholic traits in our character, or if these are not provoked by preliminary meditation. In any case, it is advisable never to commence any of the 3 forms of death meditation earlier than at least after 5 years of meditation. In other words, when the great gulf between thinking and experience which we have in the beginning has lost some of its significance. Footnote: one of the most dangerous mistakes made, especially by young people, is to use the contemplation of corpses for purposes of overcoming sensual greed, with the result that their natural drives are changed into perversity. They forget that the observation of corpses is by no means meditation of corpses, and force their characters without giving them the chance of maturing naturally. End of footnote. Further, it is not advisable that the beginner dissect his body mentally or meditate on abstract concepts without a previous knowledge of the real value, or that he meditate on the concept of God or the life of a hermit. Each of these concepts presupposes something which we are only too ready to sacrifice to prejudice. For instance, the common naive idea of God as formed in the psyche during early childhood has unconsciously become inadequate for the deeper life of the soul. Thus, we tend to look for objects which might help to widen this naive idea. However, we shall not get any farther than this archetype if we do not first pave the way beyond it. This leads to our going round in circles, to our becoming restless, when all the time we know that there is a way. Only we cannot find it because the walls of our psyche are too high. When looking for a way out of a muddle, we always try to smash through walls, since we believe the exit to be just in the direction in which we are looking. The muddle, however, is not as simple as all that. Only by changing our view can we hope to break free from it. As long as our idea of God remains a confused one, and our point of view remains childish, we cannot experience freely or even recognize the true depth known only to the heart and which the brain merely broods about. Even the first group of 10, which dissects material objects into thickness, color, appearance, and space, and neglects form, the better to demonstrate the elements through which they are expressed, should only be chosen if we are concerned with some material problem, and not if we attach greater weight to spiritual things. The investigator, the scientist, the physicist, the analyst, yes, even the philosopher, all can derive great benefits from these meditations, for the latter will direct thought into such clear and consistent channels and stimulate it so much that we might say that meditation teaches even the thinker to think almost without thought. We shall find, to our great surprise, that there is thought, that a thought process is taking place according to law. In other words, it takes place without the constraining order, I must think now. The spiritual person may here run the risk of wrongly assuming that some mystical or occult forces might be at work. This would mean destroying what he is so carefully constructing. Meditation is not meant to develop mysticism, but to remove it. For greater than all mysticism is the clarity of enlightenment. Those of us who are of a spiritual nature will find sufficient material in the third group of 10, but not all elements of it are equally advisable. The doctrine of Buddha, i.e., a practical moral code, a practical way of life, will offer the spiritual person everything he can desire. But meditation of food, too, will be beneficial for him. In short, everything which he can test practically and use in daily life. The symbolic personality of the Buddha himself may only be used in the more developed stage, for we must be completely clear what he symbolizes. Only then is it advisable to grapple with the third member. Life in solitude. This question requires more than seriousness. It requires wise maturity. The quiet contemplation of breath without mental activity is advisable for those whose fantasy is too keen. For the brooders, the choleric, on the other hand, would be better occupied with analyzing his own body. He should do so by imagining that he is an outsider looking at himself. The same applies to the materialist, while the religious person must first come to terms with matter before tackling spiritual questions. Those who are materialist must first learn to understand the mental content of the spiritual, the brooder, the spiritual content of matter, and the spiritual person, the mental content of matter. Nothing is only material, only mental, only spiritual, and this fact must and can be recognized no matter what point of view. The chosen object is meant to fill our meditative life, but not follow us into our everyday thoughts. It will affect them, but not consciously. When we shut our imagination chamber after half an hour of contemplation, then we must honestly be able to say, "It was lovely, but now back to work again." This is much better than thinking, "Ugh, work does not matter. The only important thing is to recognize ourselves more clearly." On the contrary, our everyday life matters tremendously. Meditation is only a means of shaping it. To develop meditative thought does not mean thinking of meditation, but developing thought through meditation. The psychic processes in meditation. This seems to be the most promising chapter, in that it holds out the hope that those who will not tread the weary path of experience may nevertheless benefit from a detailed description of it. When, now, I say that I shall not describe anything at all, then many will be put off and will despise me as a mystifier. It is a sad but true fact that those who are aware of the existence of things beyond description can usually find a way to them unaided, and that those who are not will never believe that these things can only be experienced but never be described. Be that as it may, they will retort, but will manage all the same. Yes, but only just manage. Many try to describe the indescribable roughly and thus merely add to the confusion. However, if we have stayed the course of the first month of meditation without being overwhelmed by too many problems, our questions will be less urgent. And after 2 or 3 years, we shall smile at those who ask the very questions we once asked ourselves. Yet, in spite of all this, none of us will entirely refrain from trying to understand things, if only roughly. We all draw conclusions from the most questionable of all syllogisms. Where there is nothing to think, nothing can exist. Here, however, something exists. Therefore, I should be able to think about it. It cannot be stressed too much that here we are not dealing either with something or yet with nothing. Buddha said, "By analogy, the true meaning of words may be made clear to reasonable people." Thus, we shall try to describe the psychic process of meditation by means of a fairy tale. At the foot of a mountain called Effort, and on whose high peak there stood a shining castle, the Castle of Truth. There lived an old beggar by the name of Homosum. Homosum did nothing but see to it that his stomach was filled. For this he was beloved and esteemed as a valuable member of society, for he always knew how to keep just on the right side of hunger, and man does not judge with his brain, but only with the stomach and the intestines. The mountain was rightly called effort, for a great effort was needed to climb it. And although Homosum and his brothers would go to any lengths to keep alive, they were all agreed that climbing the mountain was a sheer waste of energy. After all, it could not matter less whether one inspected this castle or not. It was no more than an uninteresting ruin. They had seen quite enough of these. Ruins were only for old wives who could play cards and who couldn't take brandy. When I eat my fill, I know what I'm about, but when I climb the mountain, I know nothing. This was the best known and the most common saying amongst the beggars. One night Homosum had a terrible dream. He had to face the judge of his clan. He awoke trembling and brooded over the fact that the axe could, in fact, fall at any minute, and that he might become the victim of the law that those who are of the mass are subjects to the law of the mass. Only those who climb above it may live as men. Climb, climb, he said to himself. And before the sun has risen, he knew that there was only one way to climb above the mass, the way despised by it, the way to the mountain of effort. If you must make an effort, his son said, scratching himself lazily, you might as well stay in the country and earn your daily bread honestly. Here you know where you are. Here there is food and drink. What more do you want? What can be more important than food and drink? Are we born only to eat and drink? Homosum asked, thoughtfully. His son laughed derisively. Brood away, he said. You're sure to do great things. Why don't you go and kill fat possesses and bring us his money? At least that would be productive, but to think why we are born. He scratched himself, grinned in a superior way, shook his unwashed head, and went about because he was hungry. He who has looked down from the mountain is cursed, for his eyes have been opened. This was an ancient adage, once known to all but no longer understood by anybody. It was thought to be no more than an empty phrase. Indeed, even Homosum, who was now firm in his decision to climb the mountain of effort, did not understand the meaning of these words. He brooded for many hours on what might await him there, for there had to be something, and he painted tempting but unsatisfying pictures in his own fantasy. Yet he had a premonition that it would be something different, quite different from what people thought. Once upon a time, so said the holy books, people had climbed it, and when they returned, they were called saints and lawmakers. People no longer dared to call them brothers, for only those are brothers who too are wretched, but those who returned were no longer so. One day Homosum was ready. He had made the decision to lift himself above the mass, even if only by one step. Firmly he approached the slope. The peak was enveloped in clouds. He climbed and climbed, hours, days, weeks, years. However, every time he looked back to see how far he had come, he found to his consternation that he did not appear to have gone a single step forward. On the contrary, he thought he was nearer to the old world than ever before. After a time, however, the old world became clearer, more transparent. The farther he climbed, the more could be seen through the walls of the houses, through the hearts and the cares of men, and the more did he lose his desire to escape from this world. And yet, in spiritual certainty, he climbed higher and higher, borne by the force of the dawning knowledge, which became stronger with every step, that it was neither time nor desire which brought him near to his goal, but only the very steps of his ascent. Near though he remained to his world, he yet became free of its suffering. But when he spoke of this, nobody understood him. He called, "Follow me onto the mountain. You will find greater peace. You will be able to see through your cares as if they were glass. Your world will become greater, more beautiful, and more holy." But they only laughed at him, and this laughter was like the screeching of monkeys. The few who did not laugh asked, "Explain your words. What do you mean by them?" "Just come," he called till he was out of breath. "Come and see for yourself." "What, dear friend, do you want us to see that we cannot see from here?" They replied politely and reasonably. "If you can see more things than we do, very well, we shall come, for we have always been very interested in magic with which to harm our enemies. But you say yourself that you can see no more than we do. Why go to the trouble of climbing?" The higher he climbed, the more solitary Homo soon became. The more solitary he became, the happier he was. For this solitude was not loneliness, it was an inner harmony, and he felt all distractions to be a mere burden. "There is no loneliness," he called down, "if one is satisfied with oneself." And again they laughed. "Poor devil, he is out of his mind." And the more he called to them, the more they ran home, for they were ashamed to have been his friend. Even that did not hurt him any more, for he saw their hearts, saw whether they were made of gold, silver, or pebblestone. And when he looked into their eyes, it was as if he looked into a book. And the only surprise was that he had not seen before what now appeared so simple and clear. "It's all so natural," he thought, "so childishly natural. What a world!" Years passed. He no longer climbed with great effort. He rose by his inner forces. He had forgotten his one-time longing for the peak. Now he was infinitely happy, infinitely peaceful. Yet still, he could see no more than those who, slowly overtaken by embarrassed silence, looked at him with shy eyes, and suddenly raised their hands like little children wanting to go home and afraid. One day he looked and realized that the mountain was endless. He kept silent, for how could he tell those longing for a goal? There's no goal that you can see with your eyes. "Have you reached the castle of truth?" he was asked. The castle of truth! That's what they call the goal, he remembered. And suddenly he realized that the mountain was no mountain at all, but a carpet of flowers in a stately hall. "But where is the mountain?" he asked himself in surprise, and at that moment he knew that the mountain was his own body, his own desire, his own suffering, and that he and his brothers had always been living in the castle of truth. Now he knew, daily, throughout their whole miserable lives, they had made a mountain from heaps of sand and stone, the better to hide the castle of truth. "We must climb the mountain," he said, "not for the peak's sake, but in order to raise ourselves. We must overcome desire, not in order to reach our goal, but to attain greater peace." He saw that he had been blind, and that there were no more questions at all. Although he stood amidst his brethren, he could see through them like crystal, through all that they feared or worshipped. He saw how their hearts beat, how their brains worked, how the blood circulated, how they gazed at the ground when they spoke of the stars, how they fell on their knees before pictures, and how they fled in confusion whenever a glimmer from the castle of truth penetrated their confused brooding. They had learned to long for distant goals, and they looked at the peak with tears of hope in their tired eyes. "Climb," he said. "Begin to climb." "Why?" they asked. "We love our longing. One day we'll reach it." "But it is in you and around you." "No," they said with unshakable conviction. "It is high as the heavens. Haven't you climbed it yourself? Why did you do it? And now you say that truth is amongst us? Hamasum sighed, for he knew that his words were empty. In order to find truth by looking back, truth always lies just there where we wish to escape. We must climb high above the mountain of our suffering and of our blindness, and everything that we have looked for with such longing will lie before us. An outline of the course of meditation. Those who have fully understood the previous chapter may now expect satisfaction from meditation, and will approach it with patient faith and with a minimum of skepticism and prejudice. Those, on the other hand, who are skeptical rather than convinced and nevertheless tackle the subject practically, expect a miracle, a magic result. To enter into battle without believing in victory is either suicide or a game of chance. Here it would mean a waste of time. On the other hand, it would be just as bad to pretend to be convinced by the evidence of others and without any positive personal experiences, for this would be believing without seeing. Buddha said to his pupils, "You must not simply believe what I say. You must discover the truth for yourselves. I only show you the path, yet you should not follow it merely because I have recommended it, but only because you have recognized it as the true path in your deepest soul." It is not sufficient merely to believe in a supposed truth. It must be experienced in one's deepest self. One must truly possess what one believes. There is a beautiful story to illustrate the theory and practice of true inner conviction. A pious country parson was invited for a drive by his nephew who was visiting him. Unlike his reverend uncle, the young man loved speed and therefore stepped on the accelerator so hard that the good parson sweated blood. He sat huddled in the corner of his seat and muttered continuously, "Everything is in the hands of the Lord. Nothing can happen to his children if it does not please him. We can do nothing if the Lord does not will it. It behooves us to be resigned to his decisions, for his hand is held protectively over good and evil," and so on, till he could not contain himself any longer and shouted at his nephew, "I can't stand it any longer. Either you slow down at once or I get out. You're going to kill the two of us." This little story is not meant to caricature the parson's lack of faith in God, but to show that it is in only correct and natural to condemn the shirking of decisions as mental and spiritual laziness and as cowardice. We should be very careful and skeptical when judging so-called piousness, for very often it is no more than a cloak for inability, indecisiveness, or lack of a sense of responsibility. Indeed, it is a perversion to behave towards current difficulties like a rabbit before a snake, and to make religious humility an excuse for our cowardice. It is easy to blame some higher power for our misfortunes, particularly since our laziness of thought rebels against inner activity, as the Japanese adage has it. As long as I stand on the bridge, the river is still and the bridge flows. We know that the sun stands still and that the earth moves, but our daily experience is quite the opposite. We observe a change, and believing that we are constant, we logically conclude that it is God who creates, sends, knows, wills, threatens, and rewards. Those who decide to discover true religion in themselves will be able to solve this problem without profaning or denigrating any of the things which have always been held in reverence. And after all, why should this happen? When deeper understanding makes everything more profound, when even a fish becomes more significant, how could what is humanity's highest good suddenly become profaner, more insignificant through a clearer and deeper conviction, through the unclouded contemplation of our own depth? On the contrary, only if we lift ourselves from blind familiarity and prejudice into active faith will our deepest natural conviction become a source of the highest and purest certainty. We know that we are restless and wish to overcome this physical restlessness. It is for this reason that without philosophizing about it, we train to lie still, not to force matters, but merely to become more peaceful, to gain greater self-mastery. We know that we are the victims of a mad whirlwind of thought, that hitherto we had no other way to enlightenment than the uncertain feeling, our so-called belief, that the true source of our eternal forces lay beyond thought. Now we begin to collect our thoughts, to concentrate, to free ourselves slowly from the curse of time, to see clearly what previously was vaguely suspected. When we have reached this point, then we have reached a level from which we can see farther and better. Now we know that we are not simply accepting the statement of others, but have such an indescribable feeling of certainty, springing from our own pure and deep experience, that we are filled with a great vision. We no longer follow anything that is uncertain, but experience our inner soul as an integral part of religion. We do so more and more from day to day. What is once experienced can never be lost. It is with this infinitely strong and therefore infinitely happy assurance, which bathes our entire lives in a clear light, that we enter our meditation chamber, and for some hours of meditation we look at ourselves closely. The difficulties and the achievements cited here are naturally only one combination chosen at random from an infinite number of possibilities. Everybody will experience them in a different order, but there is hardly one who will escape them entirely. One will experience one obstacle, another a different one. One will overcome it more quickly, another more slowly, but everyone will have to come to terms with it sooner or later. Yet nobody need fear that his difficulties are especially great. There are no difficulties which cannot be overcome. It is only a question of time and patience. Once mastered, they will never return. It will be shown that what prevented meditation was, in fact, precisely what made life itself so impossible. For everything which disturbs our lives also disturbs meditation, and everything which helps meditation also helps our tranquility and our success in daily life. Meditation is never for a single moment a strange world of its own. Now we have sat down on our carefully prepared cushion. Do not feel the slightest pressure of a belt or collar, etc. Are as much at ease as possible, and there's no danger that after 5 minutes we will find to our irritation that we are extremely uncomfortable. A deep breath, similar to the one at night when we pull the covers over our ears, indicates that we are content within, and thus meditation begins. This breath is a physical token of the fact that we are free of desire, if only for the moment. If perchance we have decided to shorten the period of meditation of that day by just a little because we are so pressed for time, we must nevertheless try not to rush through it. For after all, no poet will say, "Today I must write 3 poems, but I must write them quickly as I have to call out the Ministry of Finance." He will write only 1 poem, but he will do it well. He will do less, but do it correctly. Further, we must never say, "I must be careful of the time, for when I am deeply immersed, I may not notice that it is getting too late." We can forget such or similar fears completely, for never yet has it happened that anybody has missed anything of great importance through meditation. However, this has happened very often when one is not concentrated. It is a strange but incontestable fact that we can concentrate on any object whatsoever, and that we are nevertheless on time, if what we are afraid of missing is really important. This is proof of the careful guard kept by the subconscious, and is known to us by the strange phenomena of punctual waking. We must say to ourselves, the world has ceased to exist for the moment. Outside these 4 walls, there is a desert which does not interest me in the least. But note well, do not force yourself to think of anything definite, for all those thoughts with a rebellious need for freedom would be up in arms. True, they must be disciplined to respond to our command, but it is easier to tame a fly than one's own thoughts. To master them, we not only require patience, but a great deal of diplomacy. Time after time, we must let them run their courses patiently and amicably, in order, time after time, to pull them by the lead with a come, come. At the start, this seems hopeless, but it is merely difficult. Just as difficult, or perhaps even more so, is it to shut out thought altogether. In the beginning, it will not be possible for more than about 5 seconds, but after a year, for more than a minute. The difficulty of this exercise lies in the fact that one doesn't notice thoughts creeping back, but suddenly remembers, while one has long been brooding about something, that actually one didn't want to think of anything at all. If for a short time we have no thoughts at all, then not even the thought, don't think of anything, could have arisen. But back to the practical exercise. Throughout the first week, we want to do no more than become accustomed to the atmosphere of our meditation chamber. We want to become very familiar with our environment and therefore look with great care and interest at everything around us for at least 2 weeks and for at least 10 minutes, and not longer than 20 or 30 minutes at a time. Here, we do not even want the following prejudice to arise. Dash it, there is nothing to see on the walls. I don't have to look at them. Nothing is uninteresting, only prejudice. Whether the wall is interesting or not can only be determined after at least 1 week. And should we think, I can do it much more quickly, then even a week might be inadequate. After all, there is nothing for us to expect or to miss. We must only absorb, even with our eyes and with the surface of the skin. This sucking in of the atmosphere may sometimes, and not slowly, but very suddenly, become boring. This is an important sign, but unfortunately not a positive one, for it simply means that other distracting thoughts are rather unfairly demanding admission by deluding us that they are more important than quiet attention. But still, we wish to be conciliatory and not to fight one prejudice with another. We leave our observation, open the door to the thoughts, and let them come. One thing, however, we must remember: attention. Only now we pay it to the thoughts rushing into our head. We investigate what thought is demanding admission, and we try to determine why it demands admission. We think about the sudden thought, or better, we make it an object of meditation. This we shall only be able to do for a little while, for another thought will be asking admission, and this too we observe carefully until after a few minutes we again take the initiative and return to our starting point. We allow this to happen a number of times, and then with just as deep a breath as at the beginning, we end the meditative exercise. This, as we said before, will continue for a few weeks. Only when we get the pleasant feeling that this absolutely immobile way of sitting is somehow extremely soothing and restful does our attentive attitude change, and we do nothing but enjoy the peace, just as we enjoy the first few minutes in a comfortable chair after a tiring day. In that case also, we merely think, how very peaceful and nice it is. What a great pleasure. As soon as active thinking begins anew, peace has gone. Therefore, we must try to remain as free of thought as possible, even if at the start we shall only succeed for a very short time. Oddly, the first thought which enters our apparently empty consciousness is the thought of breathing, for we suddenly notice that we are breathing. This thought we may gladly welcome, and we may consciously observe the pump of life, but with this friendly hint to our breath: please don't be disturbed, but carry on as you usually do. Well, it won't listen, and just like a pupil under the eyes of his teacher, it will become far more active, but only until it gets used to the observer. Then, however, we may discover some very interesting things. For instance, that during very great concentration, breath may stop altogether for quite a long time. I myself became aware of this quite by accident. I had the misfortune to be living in a very unhealthy part of India, and during the rainy season especially, I suffered from some unpleasant complaints. One night of terrible breathing pains in particular I shall never forget. It was only concentration which helped me to bear these pains, for throughout the night I had to lie absolutely still, and to stand the pain at all, I had to breathe as little as possible. The next day the doctor came. He listened to my heart and lungs, and I was so withdrawn both because of my pain-relieving concentration and physical weakness that I was only brought back to myself by his question, "How do you do it? I have been listening to your lungs for the last 5 minutes without you having taken a single breath all this time." I myself hadn't noticed anything, for as soon as my attention was brought back, breathing proceeded in its usual rhythm, and my conscious attempts to arrest it only produced that well-known unpleasant feeling of suffocation and increased my already great pain. Just as I only became aware of this phenomena indirectly, so will nobody else be able to make this strange discovery consciously, for after all, breathing is only a means in the service of concentration, and meditation never an aim in itself. The endeavor to control breathing consciously is simply the result of misunderstanding the purpose of these exercises, and only proves that we are trying to develop supernatural faculties. This, however, we should and may never do. These faculties will arise quite naturally, and the mature conscience and modesty of those who have understood the deeper meaning of meditation will take them very seriously, but never use them sensationally. As soon as the mind has become accustomed to independent breathing observation, we begin that series of exercises described in the chapter called The Observation of Breathing. It is advisable to keep the eyes slightly but never too tightly closed so that the eyes muscles are not tensed. The position of the eyes when the lids are closed is not exactly the same as in sleep. It is as if we looked at an object about 8 inches distant directly in front of us, i.e. the eyes are turned slightly inwards. This prevents both our falling asleep and that disturbing tension which arises when, following the suggestions of Hatha Yoga, we look at the tip of our nose. Hatha Yoga does this for a special reason, which need not be discussed here. During the exercise, we breathe through the nose, the mouth is closed, and the entire tongue lies close to the lower teeth. In other words, the mouth is very slightly tensed. This is done because no concentrated thinking is possible at all if all the muscles of speech are completely relaxed. On the other hand, it is important to see that the rest of the body is relaxed, and we do so during those all too frequent intervals of concentration when we give free rein to our straying thoughts. This applies particularly to the parts around the eyes, the forehead, and the root of the nose. In this exercise, too, we may become bored, and we must treat this boredom just as we did in the previous exercise. Only when we are sure that we can spend at least 5 minutes on one exercise without being distracted, may we think of entering into meditation beyond concentration. Here, too, there is no abrupt transition, but only a natural sliding. Through absolute concentration, thought has become as peaceful as a calm sea. Into this sea, we now drop the object of meditation, as if it were a stone. It is not a case of giving our thoughts free rein apart from directing them to a certain object. It is not active thought work which must be done now, but what happens is that consciousness, now clear as the sea, no longer rests in itself, but on a picture or a concept, objects of meditation. There's no longer a thinking about, but only pictures or concepts in thought. The only thing that has been discarded is prejudice. What remains is a mirror of pure consciousness. However, Before we reach this, many years may have passed. Time after time, active thought will want to go on its way, and time after time, we shall have to give in until our quiet will proves itself the stronger, the victor. Then the door to everything is open, for then we are free from all deception. Not everyone will be able to reach this point, for the path is long, for many longer than life itself. But many will be able to experience the goal for seconds as some reward for their tenacity. Those who have experienced these seconds of pure contemplation will know that no effort has been too great, that they have found a treasure whose value will be appreciated most when their need is greatest. Meditation is as manifold as life itself. Today, obvious failure, which will afterwards prove to have benefited us. Tomorrow, success, which will only lead to new difficulties, but never a straight course to success. Life, however, is such that in spite of all failure or lack of success, we shall one day nevertheless be mature and experienced men. The same applies to meditation, which, while requiring a constant vigilance against confusion of thought for many years, nevertheless elevates us in the course of our endeavors. There will always be days, always few and far between, on which we shall be able to say with joy and with victorious pride, "Well now, finally I made it. Now I can do it." Yet the next day things are worse than they had ever been before, and it may only too easily happen that we conclude that the whole of meditation is nonsense, although only yesterday we were ready to stake our lives on it. The isolated days of apparent success are the so-called rewards which are worthless in themselves and are no more than small momentary incentives. They're like the sweets which the child is given when it is required to go to school. At first, it only goes because of the sweets, and then it learns, not through those sweets, but with the psychological aid of these sweets, for they give him pleasure, and we need a little pleasure now and then to spur us on. On the next day, however, we must account for our pleasure, and the account, as most of them, is usually unpleasant. At first we think we are thrown back, and in a way we really are, for the joyful expectation of equal success in the future is precisely what we had overcome, and is only too ready to re-emerge to create the well-known obstacle anew. It will take us a few days to forget this success of the one isolated day, and for the path of systemic development to run quite peacefully again. Indeed, out of the clear sky, days will appear in which self-recollection will be almost impossible, and on which we believe that we have done something wrong because we can't make progress. Those who, because of this, abandon meditation have not succumbed to the difficulties of meditation, but to their own shortcomings. For in meditation, there are no natural obstacles. These are only found in man himself. Some shortcomings, however, must not be suppressed. They must be lived out. They must, like the snowman in the sun, thaw away to nothing without our impatient assistance. Total meditation. From all the above, we may conclude that the whole of meditation consists of overlapping stages. Although they are different, each stage contains the germ of the one above it. Throughout, there is a constant liberation from extra-conscious elements, until there remains only consciousness alone, but not its activity. Consciousness is directed, but no longer active. This can be expressed as follows. Those active components which lie between the soul and consciousness, such as our experiences, picture and concept, our judgments, positive or negative, our active will, for or against. In short, everything which produces decisions based on experience, everything guided by feeling and supported by the will, becomes passive and disengaged. Because of this, a straight and unobstructed path leads directly from consciousness to the soul, a path which knows no illusions, but only the immediate and absolute truth. Under these circumstances, time itself ceases because there's no longer any process. Nothing becomes, everything is. This is the immediate experience of eternity. Everything which normally does not belong to consciousness or belongs to it only by its manifestations can now be experienced immediately, i.e., not in its picture, but in itself. The above, however, is not a very good explanation, since the very word itself is completely misleading and assumes a something, in other words, a material concept, and this is not what we mean. Here now, in this first step of timeless experiences, we recognize absolute space. Not space as the unit of volume, not a space, but infinite, unexpanding space. This is the first step of total meditation, which can only be reached after the attainment of that absolute concentration, which is always associated with the highest degree of meditation. The next step is potentially contained in the previous one, but now it takes the form of pure enlightenment, without any pictorial concepts, for these we have long discarded. Now we shall discover a polarity between the seer, absolute consciousness, and the seen, the eternal, both of which are inseparably bound to each other, just like plus and minus, mountain and valley, like the two halves of a circle. Here we have infinite consciousness experiencing absolute space. Here, too, neither pictures nor concepts are found. Nothing, in fact, which we can include in our store of experience. The best illustration of how little our concepts can describe these processes is given by the famous question of Zen-Buddhism. If I clap my hands, which is the sound of the right hand? The third step is made up of the recognition of the result of this polarity between space and consciousness, its unreality, its emptiness, its unity. This was called unio mystica by Christian mystics when speaking of the same process. Those who, in meditation, have known a measure of deep inner experience themselves, and who read the words of Master Eckhart or Jacob Bohm, will see their own experiences confirmed there, with the essential differences we shall discuss when we deal with Christian mystics. We have only been able to give a rough description of these psychological processes because of the paucity of language. The last, the highest, the fourth step, however, cannot even be described roughly, for there are no comparisons to indicate it at all. We have no words to describe what lies behind the core of all unity. This much is certain. It is the highest goal of all religion and of all faiths. Perhaps the name given to it by Christian mystics is the best. It is a mystical death. We do not want to delay the reader with fruitless speculations, for it is better to remain factual for 100 pages than to rave for even 1 page over a goal to which we do not know the way. Nevertheless, the opinion prevalent even in the East that total meditation cannot be attained by anyone today is quite baseless. Everyone can experience it, if only for one happy fraction of a single moment, and if, as wise old men, having nurtured each hour of meditation with infinite patience, we had experienced but this one fleeting moment, our lifelong labors would not have been in vain. This moment, this fraction of eternal enlightenment, will have been lifted clear out of time, will become an eternity and be the very purpose of all our existence. Thus we have reached the end. Have we really done so? No, for we haven't even begun. For as long as we have not discarded everything meant by the words saying and understanding, and as long as we have not entered that great strange gate through which we have to pass naked at the birth or in death, the gate of experience, so long has our true life not even begun. For life does not want to be said or understood. Life will and must be lived. As is now and ever has been, so it will be forevermore. Ever since we first said, I, we have been afraid of the great judge. We seek him with our eyes, although we have long known him in our hearts. For while our eyes are blind, our hearts have 1,000 eyes. And the greater the darkness, the clearer can the heart see the path. We always seek enlightenment, but we do not recognize it because we are confused, and the beat of our heart is too soft. We coin words and names which are as empty as the space in which they echo. Faith, we say, and believe in the word and the name, but we do not know anything about faith itself. Thus, a mere word can become our greatest barrier to thought if we do not know the path, if we do not know to trust our hearts, if we wish to delude ourselves about certainties where none are to be found. If we speak of faith as a mere aimless, vague concept, guilt-laden, and reveling in self-reproach. No, it is not true that belief is the greatest of our treasures. We can do more than merely form words. We also have the power of experiencing without words, that absolute certainty which is above all belief and more silent than death, if the eyes of the heart remain closed. Who will cast the first stone at us when, with desperate lies, we wish to flee from ourselves, when our blindness has robbed us of the only, the ultimate, and the holiest strength wherewith to bear the truth of life? We turn our backs to the sun, and we are satisfied to see our world reflected in its rays. But where there is light, there must be shadows. We wander about the world seeking the light, when all we have to do to partake of it is to turn around and to leave the shadows behind us. Then at last we may shut our own eyes, for the eyes of the heart will recognize the light 1,000 times more clearly. Then life will become 1,000 times richer, for the burden will have been lifted from our shoulders. Nothing can frighten us anymore. Nothing is mightier than the radiance and the immortal happiness of truth. Our path does not end where we thought we were lost. It ends when we return home after all our roaming, and we have nothing more to lose, where there is no end because the uncertainty of the beginning, the dark quest of whither, has become the happy at last. We know that there is a home for each one of us, if only we do not allow our false beliefs to fritter our lives away. We have but to ask, and we shall be answered. We have but to knock, and it will be opened unto us. Often we shall have no knock till our hands are raw and despair of those who pointed the thorny path to the gate. Until one day we shall suddenly understand the deep wisdom of these very great words written above the gate in glowing letters. Know thyself. Meditation in Japanese Zen-Buddhism. Zen is the name of the leading Buddhist sect in Japan, which has existed since the 12th century. The Japanese word Zen is derived from the Chinese word Chan, and this is in turn comes from the Sanskrit. There it is called dhyana. The meaning of this word in all three languages is meditation. Everything that we find so strange in Japanese culture is inseparably bound up with the meditative character of Zen Buddhism, and from it there arise the mysterious cults, the liberating beauty of home ritual. Footnote: if we compare the simplicity of our meditation chamber with that of the Japanese living room, we shall find a striking resemblance. End of footnote. The festive thoughtfulness of the tea ritual, cha-no-yu. Footnote: here again, but on a higher level, there applies what we said about the meditation of eating. For the tea ritual, after all, is no cult in the usual ritual sense, but a purely meditative process. End of footnote. The fabulous art of the flower ritual, of watercolors, of poetry, or archery, and even of fencing. In short, from jujutsu to philosophy, everything has its origin in the spirit of Zen. What is Zen? Meditation, certainly, but much more than that. Immeasurable potentialities are hidden in this modest source. It is the birth of natural wisdom and natural beauty. It is so simple and so natural that our confused senses cannot believe it. Look for something behind it. Go around in circles and become confused. We despair because we have run past the aim for so long, because we constantly believe we ought to be able to think it all out. The Zen master, however, smiles, and with his smile destroys everything that thinking, brooding, calculation, proofs, logic, and reason have carefully constructed. Zen cannot be described. It can only be experienced. But just as it is difficult to describe it, so it is easy to experience Zen. Only experience must be freed from the burden of thought. Those who can distinguish between thoughtlessness and freedom from thought have not far from to go to find Zen. It is just the same here as with everything else in life. The best way is always the most natural, for it is the shortest. But call it faith, karma, or curse, we always prefer the path of tortuous thought, the logical thought and calculated way, as if life itself were logical or calculable. Zen asks neither for logic nor for reason, but only for facts, so naked that to us we are so fettered with logic they appear completely incomprehensible. There is little sense in trying to explain the subtle wisdom of Zen with mere words. Many good books have been written on it without succeeding in their attempts to explain theoretically what in experience has proven to be so simple and clear. It cannot be done, and we shall not try it here. However, I should like to relate two little stories, one historical and one which happened to me, which serve to show that any word of explanation is left miles behind the experience itself. How it only affects our thoughts, while true experience goes empty-handed, and yet the simplest, if indefinable way, is experience itself. A young monk approached a master of Zen and asked, "What is Buddhism?" The master kept silent, and the young man repeated his question, since he thought that the master had not heard him. The master simply took a cup and gracefully dropped it to the ground where it broke. Then did the young man see the light of wisdom. In order to understand the significance of this story, we must have experienced it. After reflecting on it, we might well find beautiful and suitable explanations for the action of the master. But this is not the point at all, for the master did not want to explain anything. Only because he understood the wisdom of the master immediately, without using the bypath of logical thought, he had no time for this, did he become enlightened. For enlightenment is not intellectual conviction, that would be philosophy, but immediate experience. Perhaps my own experience may serve the purpose even better, because it moves on the same level, and it gave me a very clear understanding of the experience involved. I have forgotten with whom I was having this discussion. I only know that it was somewhere in Asia, and that the discussion was about some subtle problem of Buddhism. We were both deep in discussion, and I had to be most alert, since a discussion of philosophy and metaphysics in a foreign tongue requires the fullest activity of the mind, even if one should have mastered the subject. It was obvious that my whole thought machine was active, but that the realm of experience was completely dormant, as is customary in intellectual discussions. Whether it was to make some point, or whether it was for no purpose at all, even this I have forgotten. In any case, unexpectedly and very suddenly, and as far as I was concerned, quite irrelevantly, the other clapped his hands. In that instant, the unbridgeable gulf between thought and experience became so plastically clear to me as never before. For some seconds I was beyond all thought and felt the radiance of pure enlightenment. I know that had this hand clapping been logical or intellectually bound up with my thoughts, it would have passed me by just as the words did. Only because it was completely outside the closed circle of the intellect did it, like an arrow, hit the very center of another sphere which beyond all logic lies in pure experience, and thus on a higher, pure, and more enlightened level. Here words are no longer needed to convince. Here the force of conviction due to pure, unanalyzable experience leads to the highest enlightenment. This is Zen. Here thought is not only superfluous, but it is an obstacle to pure experience. That shockwave which plumbs the spiritual depth so quickly that no inhibiting thought can obstruct it. It is a complete process of meditation in the fraction of one single second. And this is more than enough. For as we saw in the previous chapter, we do not need long periods to recognize truth, which is the soul itself. It is only pictures and concepts which require time and space. Immediate inner perception takes place on a different level. It is the same level from which Buddha could survey all his previous existences within the space of one moment. It is the level from which Mozart experienced a whole concert in the fraction of a second, but to write it down took many weeks. It is, however, also that level which, from the moment of the great divide, from that immeasurably short instant of death onwards, enters as eternity into our last ray of consciousness, as eternal damnation or as eternal salvation. But this is not eternal in the sense of being endless, but in the sense of being beyond all time. And here too, it is our own guilt or merit which decides whether we flee from the judge who, beyond conscious understanding, sentences us with the tremendous force of an impenetrable dream. We grasp that door which attracts us most strongly, which corresponds best to our natural characteristics acquired during our long, unreflecting lives. For thought does not exist, only timeless and impulsive, i.e., instinctive action. Thus we believe that we can escape our guilt and all the fears of hell, and for that very reason we take them into our new existence. Here, if we can, we hold everyone responsible for this apparently unjust burden to ourselves. Our fate is our own work, and it is also our judge. It follows us farther than thought. What follows death is not reward or punishment. It is that half of the great scale which, while it rests in darkness, rises and falls according to whether we load or free that half which is our life. What a clear and simple law. The timeless ray of enlightenment, however, allows us to look into the dark, and thus we who dare look beyond the confining walls of prejudice and thought directly into immediate experience are beyond the riddle of past and future. The life and training of Zen monks serve this purpose. Nothing is farther from them than mystical and secret doctrines. Zen is an immediate union with all that goes to make up daily life. These monks grow their own food, busily tilling their own land, for physical labor is healthy and near to life, just as is Zen. Life in the Zen monastery begins long before the sun rises. Physical and spiritual labor is wisely balanced. No more spoken than is absolutely necessary, and all meals are taken communally and in silence. Every monk has been given a problem, a koan, by the master, with which to occupy his inner self for days, weeks, yes, sometimes even for years, until one day, through the path of inner contemplation, he arrives at the enlightening answers, Satori. May I be permitted to refer to a little book which, as no other, gives an idea of the way and the method of Zen. The author, a German sage, who for many years was a lecturer at Tokyo University, devoted himself to the practical study of Zen, and wrote a short and yet complete, even dramatic, survey of the course of his education. Here, no crank speaks, but a serious, thorough, open-hearted scientist. Footnote: Eugene Herrigel, Zen in the Art of Archery. End of footnote. Let us listen to his description of the archery of his master, pages 71 through 72. I sat opposite him on a cushion. He passed me a cup of tea, but did not speak. We sat thus for a long time. We could hear nothing but the singing of the kettle of boiling water. Finally, the master rose and beckoned me to follow him. The gymnasium was brightly illuminated. The master told me to put a mosquito candle, long and thin like a knitting needle, in front of a target, but not to switch on the light over it. It was so dark that I could not even see the contours of the target, and if the tiny spark of the mosquito candle had not given it away, I might have suspected the position of the target, but I could not have made it out. The master danced the ceremony. His first arrow was shot from radiant brightness into deep night. By the sound, I could hear that he had hit the target. The second arrow, too, was well aimed. When I switched on the light over the target, I discovered to my astonishment that the arrow had hit the bullseye, while the second had splintered the first one and had cut its shaft open before boring into the bullseye next to it. I did not dare to pull the arrow out one by one, but I returned them both together with the target. The master looked at them carefully. The first hit may not appear a great feat to you, he said, since you will say that I have been so familiar with the position of the target for decades that it should not have been too difficult to hit it even in the dark. Be that as it may, I do not wish to change your mind. What do you think of the second arrow hitting the first? I, for one, know that it was not I who should be given credit for this shot. It simply shot. It hit. Let us bow to the aim as if it were the Buddha. What was it again that we said of the hand clapping? Had the arrow been guided by logical thought, had it been aimed, thought would have led it elsewhere. Here, however, the arrow hit the very center of the soul. Let us bow down before the aim as if it were the Buddha. Meditation in the Wonderland of Tibet. Civilization is an enemy of spiritual development, for it serves the satisfaction of material needs alone. Civilization makes life pleasant, i.e., it makes it easy for man to forget his inner responsibilities. But regrettable though it might be, it is nevertheless a quite natural striving of humanity to choose the most pleasant way of life and to forget all the unpleasantness caused by our own inadequacy. Thus, it has come about that a people is judged by its civilization rather than by its culture, which, though it has more modest manifestations, makes far greater demands. Whereas culture is of the heart, civilization is no more than a veneer. There are only a few who know that Tibet, the secret country behind the folds of the Himalayas, is one of the most cultured countries on earth. All we do know is that it is one of the poorest in civilization, for there are no trains, no cars, no cinema, indeed, not even a newspaper. Footnote: the only newspaper appearing in the Tibetan language is printed in India. End of footnote. The traveler is strangely touched by the fact that in even the most primitive villages, he will find temples in which are stored works of art of breathtaking beauty. These are by no means only works of time long past, but here the ancient is harmoniously coupled with the modern. The popular art of Tibet today, just as 1,000 years ago, is of a surprisingly high standard. Tibet is a purely Buddhistic country, and the religious philosophy of its people is, even with their complete lack of civilization, of a spiritual and mental depth, and at the same time of so admirable a nearness to life that we may call this people one of the most spiritual peoples on earth. No other people has so comprehensive a philosophical literature, and no other lives in so immediate a unity with the philosophy of its religion. All the elements that went into it, from Mongolia in the north, from China in the east, from Nepal and India in the south, from the old Orient and Europe itself in the west, were absorbed intelligently and with inner self-certainty. Nothing new was added to the old before it was understood. Only then was it absorbed and gracefully incorporated, and thus enriched the whole. It was no foreign body such as we find in Gandhara art, or in the innumerable independent stylistic elements of Indian art of the Middle Ages, but an affirmation of its own inner diversity, the present. The basis for all this creative independence is found in the certainty and absolute clarity of their philosophy, in the knowledge of what is essential, in their absolutely clear self-recognition, and in their recognition of the truly religious depths, in short, in their meditative results. The intuitive perception of the fathers, the wisdom of the holy books of religion, indeed, all religions observed today, find their counterparts even now amongst the holy men of Tibet, if only in rare cases. These great sages who live in the caves of the Himalayas, far from all human habitation, who develop their natural faculties in years and even decades of hard schooling, are beyond all limitation, for their wisdom far transcends the ridiculous business of the world. These men are rightly an example for every religious Tibetan, who, today as ever, does not judge the merit and the venerability of a man by his possessions, his rank, or his age, but by the measure of his wisdom alone, be he a beggar, or even, strangest of all possibilities, a stranger, a European. Everywhere in Tibet, around the large monasteries, there are small, empty single-story houses. They do not belong to anyone because they belong to everyone. They are houses of meditation. Whoever, villager, lama, stranger, or abbot, wishes to retire here for a certain time to meditate without disturbance, will be richly and gladly supplied with food by the population, and can be certain of everyone's protection and help. Generally, people retire for 3 months. Some do it for years, and there have been cases where pious lamas allowed themselves to be immured for the rest of their lives. Only when the food placed into a hole in the wall is found untouched are the wall and door broken down so that the dead lama, who has now become a saint, may be honorably buried. This year-long or lifelong solitude is not infrequently carried out in the complete darkness. We do not wish to judge or to criticize, for in order to understand these things, we must at least have taken a small step in the same direction. This, however, is certain. To these men, lifelong darkness means more than reading an entire library does to us. I have frequently made their acquaintance, and without exception, I was always gripped to the very core of my being by the power of the personality of these saints. We need no longer ask, how can they stand their year-long solitude, and what is more, in complete darkness? How is it that they do not go mad? After all discussion, we should know that where thought and pictures and concepts have been superseded, there exists neither time nor loneliness. Indeed, neither light nor darkness. Here there is nothing we can imagine, and also nothing which we cannot imagine. We have no idea as yet of what a human being can achieve who has lived in complete seclusion for decades. There are many credible reports about the miraculous powers of these mysterious people. It has been proved that, in a state of total meditation, they are capable of running for hundreds of kilometers without stopping, and at so great a speed that even a rider on horseback cannot follow them. They have the power of appearing at several places at the same time, and they can sit naked on the ice during a polar Tibetan winter, and while remaining motionless for days and nights, even melt the snow around them. By the simple power of thought, they can send messages to distant friends, can read the thoughts of others as a book, and can immediately heal wounds of even the greatest severity. Our imagination is quite inadequate to picture their powers. But all these abilities are not goals of meditative development. They are accompanying symptoms, which are mistaken for the actual goal by only a very few adepts. The Tibetan keeps his miraculous powers closely guarded secret. Even more closely does he guard the truer inner goal that he has attained, for it is a fact which cannot be stressed out too often. We may discuss meditation as such without harm, but if we give away a part of our own experiences and successes, then they are lost. It is unnecessary to add that this is not an occult, but a psychological fact. It is not very surprising that the modern city dweller is skeptical of this highest meditative achievement and simply rejects it as a fairy tale, since such things are quite impossible. However, there's no need for you to believe in it. Indeed, if you did, and strove with all your might towards it, you would only be miserably disappointed. This is a good thing, for to do so is to play with your life. The path of meditation of the Tibetan yoga is the direct path, i.e., the path which spiritually surmounts all obstacles on the way. No other way of meditation is nearly as successful, but the slightest wrong step may lead to madness or death. Footnote: many examples of this experienced by myself will be cited in my next book titled Better Unter Totem, meaning the beggar amongst the dead. End of footnote. We can and may only follow it under the expert guidance of a teacher, a guru, and it could not be otherwise, since the methods are kept a careful secret and are only transmitted orally from teacher to pupil. What we possess in written directions is incomplete, veiled, and only very partially comprehensible. Even if the inquisitive should manage to enter the land of the gods with a stolen text, and if he were to search for a guru, he would never find him until he has the requisite inner maturity. If he has not, he may live for years in the house of a master of meditation without even suspecting who is his host. If he is mature, however, he will find him, even without looking for him, for it is the strangest and most beautiful of all laws of spiritual development. The master is there when the time is ripe. Strangely enough, the dangers do not start with the yoga exercises. They begin at the very moment that the door of the house of meditation closes behind us. For all the dangers of spiritual development are found in the seeker himself. Only in complete loneliness do we learn the true meaning of the words, "Know thyself." For only then do we stand before our own true selves, not, however, in looking at the distorted picture of the fight for survival in the world outside. Nobody who has not experienced this himself can have an idea of the struggles of those who step into this entirely new world. All lies fall away, deception ceases, and only the need to vanquish or fall remains. Here there are no excuses for avoiding true enlightenment, no rosy pictures of consoling deception. Everyone must render an account of himself here, just as is usual at the moment of death, and just as there our deceived psyche demands justice. Then there will come the day of judgment. And he will know whether he will rise or be thrown down pitilessly. Those, however, who have come through will daily have a clearer horizon. Here they will find that their lonely days are full of sanctity and great peace, that they are not all lonely as we understand it, that they carry a great inner happiness which does not ask for the fulfillment of desire. This happiness surpasses all other, because it is not that happiness whose reverse is unhappiness. It is not the happiness of fulfilled wishes. It is that of not wishing at all, of the not needing to wish anymore. From this point we can survey all the faculties of man. Here there are no more questions, for we know that there is no difference between question and answer. There are no questions because there are no answers, and there is no answer because everything becomes part of the impenetrable circle of enlightenment. Those who know this do not ask, but also cannot answer. It is for this reason that the ignorant goes past the enlightened after having asked him for the way. Those, however, who have understood, see all the answers in the eyes of the sage, feel close to him, and neither ask nor speak, but know what lies behind empty words. Just as we pass millions of the people, and behind their tired, empty faces, we yet feel the depth of what was once their soul. We look for it, but it is not there. And yet in depth and divine power it is incomparably greater than anything our confused senses may conceive. There is no answer clearer than that of our inner voice. Let us learn to listen to it. Meditation in Christianity. Probably every Christian who has followed us so far will have wondered time and again, how does all this relate to my own religious concepts? Since meditation is by no means alien to Christianity, he is justified in asking why the subject was not related to Christian experience. Indeed, he might have learned and profited much more had we done so. For the Western man, the richest experiences and the greatest inner depth appear to be derived from Christianity. If I followed a different course, in spite of it all, I did so for a very good reason, which I shall now make clear. In order to make my explanation more convincing, I shall endeavor to show what meditation meant to early Christianity and what it means to the Christian of today. As all religions in the world, Christianity too can be divided into two spiritual spheres, the prophetic and the mystical. There is no clear division of these spheres, but amongst the great religious men in particular, there is a clear division between God awareness of prophetic and of mystical origin, so that the title division of spheres is not altogether inapplicable. The basic element of prophetic piousness is faith. This is not a form of intellectual believing, but rather a confident, fundamental, life-positive feeling of unconditional confidence. Faith, confidence, and trust are the basic pillars of prophetic Christianity. The God of the prophet has human traits. He is anthropomorphic, a spirit, it is true, but full of primal force, full of life. He is the eternal God of the fathers. Mysticism is diametrically opposed to this prophetic feeling of life, and for it the basic element is the experience of God. Mysticism created the passive type as opposed to the active type of prophetic piousness. Mysticism is that form of piousness in which world and the I are radically denied. Footnote, see Heiler's prayer. End of footnote. The mystics' concept of God is a speculative interpretation of their own ecstatic experiences. To the mystic, God is only the name given to his own experiences. The God of biblical prophetic religion is not the immovable, infinite unity of the mystics, not resting stillness, but the living power of the will, activity. Not highest being, summe esse, but highest life, summe vivere, from Augustinus. He is Yahweh, JHVH, the revenging God, who not only demands childish but even slavish fear, according to Loyola, before whose rage the earth trembles, according to Jeremiah, a revenger, and full of wrath, according to Nahum. The God of mysticism is a non-God, a non-spirit, a non-person, according to Master Eckhart. He is beyond activity, according to Plotinus, still and stilling all, according to Bernhard of Clairvaux, a still being, according to Tersteegen, and we can see a static but not a dynamic God, and correspondingly the religious life of these spheres is completely different, introvert in mysticism, extrovert in prophetic religion. In prophetic piousness, prayer dominates, as we know from Luther, stand by me, do, you must do it. Thus he prayed in Worms, and he explained this form of prayer. We must be shameless beggars, wanton and untiring. How short a step it is from here to the most moving prayer of all religions. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? The prayers of mystics are quite different. Master Eckhart said, we must pray so forcefully that all the limbs of man and his strength, his eyes and ears, heart, mouth, and all senses are in the prayer, and we may not stop till we find that we wish to become as one with what we have and pray for at that very moment, and that is God. And Angelus Celicia sings, no nobler prayer is than worshipping we feel how we ourselves become that before which we kneel. In prophetic Christianity, petitional prayers predominate. In mysticism, prayers of praise. In the former, prayers for moral improvement. In the latter, for a uniso mystica, a mystic unification with God, the summum bonum. These brief remarks show that a prominent position prayer plays in all Christian religions. Indeed, we should not exaggerate if we said the root of true Christianity lies in prayer. Yet it is not prayer itself which changes us, but the basic attitude on which we base our prayer. Prophetic, biblical, or mystic Ed von Hartmann said, the dialogue form of prayer is entirely dependent upon the duality of the person in religious relationship. As soon as grace is recognized as the only true principle of salvation, as immanent grace, or the real unity with the absolute end, at the same time impersonal God, this dialogue of the process of salvation becomes a monologue, i.e., prayer becomes self-communion and self-discussion. Thus, the truth of prayer lies in the absorption of the religious consciousness in itself, where God is neither known as thou or as I, but as the absolute spiritual basis, the immanent purpose and holy power of one's own personal spiritual life, as per religion of the Spirit. In prayer, we find an unexcelled interpretation of Christian meditation, for the prayer of the mystic is meditation. The portals of the senses becomes closed, mien, so that we may incline entirely towards the inside, to dip into the deep places of the soul, according to Heiler, to take ourselves back into ourselves, according to Albertus Magnus. But it is not enough for the pious person hungry for salvation to free himself from the outer world of objects. Rather must he free himself from his own ego, from all selfish desire and demands. He must suppress those natural spiritual currents which create restlessness in man, and especially the stormy effects and the urgency of the will. He must banish from his soul the colorful fantasies constantly rising from the depths of the emotions and passions. Indeed, he must even abandon all thinking and evaluation of profane objects, according to Heiler. These scenes become blind, as per Mitchell von Magdeburg. Man falls away from himself and from all things, according to Seuss. But this unbecoming, as per Eckhart, does not stem from the usual state of wakefulness, but from above it, from superconscious states of consciousness, according to Heiler. Just like meditation proper, deepest prayer can be divided into degrees of depth. Evidence for this is offered by the so-called prayers scales of Christian mystics. The first step to meditative prayer is oral prayer, which still lies outside the actual prayer scale, according to John Arndt. It is the word without deeper soul responses, an introduction, so to speak. The actual prayer scale always begins with conscious and deliberate concentration, with direct or indirect attention to God directly, the self-recollection, according to John von Cruz. Those psychological explanations of Buddhist scholasticism mentioned during our discussion of the spiritual process in the different steps of meditations are confirmed by Christian mystics, even if not quite so exhaustively and systematically. Their voice of words is often cruder, more original, more immediate, and also possibly livelier and more plastic for those not too closely acquainted with the subject. On the first step of prayer, according to Saint Teresa and other mystics, man himself is still active, while the spiritual states of higher prayer are created spontaneously. Conscious concentration and meditation do not create states spontaneously, but only prepare and favor the work of divine grace, according to Heiler. He who prays seeks solitude. By an act of the will, he diverts his attention from the outer world. He collects his senses and withdraws them from all seeing and hearing, according to Goyen. He frees himself from the distracting multiplicity of spiritual contents and suppresses the rush of emotions and ideas in his inner being, according to Heiler. Undisturbed by profane thought, he turns to things divine, as per Al-Ghazali. This form of contemplation is one of the reasoned conclusions and of brooding on reason, as per Petrus of Alcantara. Reasoned contemplation and reflection, according to John von Cruz. Saint Teresa, however, recommends not to tire oneself by constantly new considerations, but to let the activity of reason rest and to enter briskly into the presence of the Lord. On the second step, the attentiveness characteristic of the first step disappears, discursive thought activity fades, the lively play of concrete fantasy ceases, and all becomes very still in the soul of the contemplative, as per Heiler. Deeply contented, the soul rests in God, who grants it an inexplicable, sweet, peaceful happiness, who fills all its faculties with the deepest satisfaction, with the purest feeling of pleasure, as per Teresa de Jesus. The soul stops thinking altogether and creates peace in God, as per John von Cruz. In its psychological effects, this second step too corresponds exactly to its description in Buddhist texts. However, while the Buddhist monk turns inward without any object, the soul, as John von Cruz puts it, rests lovingly in God and unites wondrously with Him in joy and veneration and with the omnipotence of love. Here too, God remains the immutable. The third step of prayer differs neither in kind nor in manner from the second, but only in intensity. Saint Teresa calls this condition the slumber of the faculties of the soul. The soul enjoys infinitely more happiness, delight, and pleasure than before. It wants to stream out in praise of divine love. It only asks for God, no longer belongs to itself, but only to Him. Here there is a difference between the experiences of mystics on the one hand and that of the Buddhist and Quietists on the other. Not delight and pleasure are the significant moments here, but unshakable equanimity. Not spiritual delight, but the quiet happiness which is beyond joy and pleasure. The most decisive is the fourth, and the last step onto which the name prayer can no longer be applied, and of which the mystic David von Osberg said, "Man and God now become one." Madame de Gouillon gives an excellent description of it. Reason becomes obscured, memory pales, the will loses all tension. Even the slightest movement of the ego ceases to be. Desire, inclination, wishes, opposition, disinclination, all is gone. The soul enters the dark awe, full condition of mystical death by passing into a state of complete insensitivity. It has become indifferent towards the world, towards itself, towards God. It neither loves nor hates any longer. It neither suffers nor rejoices. It does neither good nor evil. It does nothing at all. The soul has nothing, wants nothing, is nothing, and is becoming annihilated. In spite of their apparent similarity, here we have the significant difference between the nirvana of the Buddhist and the mystical death of the Quietist. Nirvana is the last, the highest goal of all striving for salvation. It is the deliverance from the vicious circle of rebirth, from the causal law of cause and effect. Mystical death, however, precedes resurrection. It is the stage of transition towards the blessed unification with God, according to Heiler. Wherein does this difference lie? In the degree of absorption. We are on fairly safe ground if we say that the mystics, with few exceptions, have not managed to pass beyond the second step of prayer. What has been described as the third and fourth step is merely the abstract development of this second step in a manner known to us from the chapter on total meditation. It is the unfolding of that fourth step which Buddhists can attain, in which there are no more active elements of the will at all, and which no longer represents a further intensification, but merely a purification. Now we are in a position to state why we have preferred the Buddhist technique to that of the Christian mystics. To the Asiatic, meditation is a means for perfecting his life, and in this respect it is useful for us too. For the mystic, it is something exclusively religious, and to this we find it very hard to reconcile our way of life and also that of the Buddhism. Pure mysticism is extremely individualistic, according to Heiler. It knows only God and the soul, as per Augustinus. The pious soul must be united with God as if nothing but God and the soul itself existed, according to Albertus Magnus. Escape from life, disdain for life and the world are the highest principles of mysticism, but neither of modern Christianity nor Buddhism, where we do not say, "Plant fear of you into my heart, that I may flee the world according to your commandments, and that I may hate it and wisely protect myself from it. Do not let me err in their midst, O Christ," as per Simeon the New Theologian. How different is this from the old Buddhist text? Neither on distant mountains nor at the bottom of the deep sea can the guilty escape the bitter fruits of his misdeeds, the Dhammapada. It is not possible to identify mysticism, no matter of what religion, with Buddhism, however many common characteristics they may have. Let us make a short and factual survey of religious mysticism, the better to be able to judge their significant differences. All religions, as far as we have been able to ascertain, develop some meditative practices, all of which have common psychological characteristics. Out of Islam, there arose the meditative sects of the Sufis and the Dervishes. Greek Orthodox Christianity, which is so very branched and interwoven, has innumerable mystico-meditative sects. These form a phenomena in themselves because in them, by means of an unlimited transition into Asiatic fields, branches towards Lamaism on the one hand, as towards the shamanism of Siberian Mongolia on the other. So much was mixed and borrowed that we may almost speak of a white spot on the religious map. The Hasidic sect of the Jews, as also certain sections of the Parsic fire cult of Zoroaster, bear mystico-meditative marks. The original Chinese religion, the old Indian Vedantic, the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the old American, the old Roman, and the Greco-Marian religions show very few, if any, marks of meditative intensification. Here there still rules eudaemonist prayer and the cult of gods. Only in the full development of Hellenic culture, in the religion of the Hebrew prophets, in Confucianism and in Taoism, and in the epoch of the Upanishad do we find religion turning towards ethics. The deeper and the more individual these religions, the more stress is placed on moral values. Thus, there is a general but independent religious orientation from the outside towards the inside. We are justified in assuming that meditation was born at the very moment that a change in this orientation took place. Today, there is not a single religion which is not, at least in one of its sects, built on meditation. Indeed, even those secret societies which appear to the mass as irreligious, such as Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Pacifists, Kabbalists, etc., all have their definite meditative practice. It appears an almost Herculean labor to compare these innumerable schools of meditation among themselves, but if we do so, we shall learn, to our surprise, that the difference is purely external. While the contents of meditation, not the objects themselves, but their pictures and their assumed measure of relative reality, constantly change from religion to religion and from one secret society to the next, and thus apparently differ from one another, their basic psychological orientation, both in respect of the way and the goal, is astonishingly uniform. All of them fully correspond in their religious respect to Christian mysticism, even if the immanent being in them, such as the God concept, differs more from one religion to the next than within the two main religious tendencies, prophetic and mystical, of the same religion. This fact shows both how all-penetrating is the concept of God and how relative such a concept is as long as it is postulated a priori. Every form of mysticism assumes the concept of God in spite of its alleged immanence. Indeed, without this absolute hypothesis, it would lose its meaning. As long as a concept is assumed and meditated upon, not as an object as Buddhists do, but as a subject as mystics do, it is transferred in the very form in which it was created by consciousness to the sub and the unconscious. The result differs from the starting point only in that the concept becomes a spiritual experience. This may still take place in practice and with good effect up to the second step. It is the self-created God who is experienced, not the absolute God. Meditation, as we have learnt it in this book, is neutral from the start, i.e., it has no conscious religious bias, but it ends with the deepest religious experience. Those who believe they will lose their God when beginning to meditate without him have never known him. However, they may find him in meditation when they have looked deeply enough into themselves. For only when the immanence of God has been proved unconditionally in the course of mystical or meditative experience does he become a truly experienced power. No, we do not wish to seek the divine in thought. We must consciously put aside the picture of God formed by reason and merely learn to open our heart, to let the truly divine stream in without its becoming a picture of God, without its becoming a false idol. Had we, in this book, adhered strictly to the words of the mystics, we should have introduced a picture into meditation, which, with its terrible force, would have prevented the delicate truth from being born. The true mystics were admittedly above the picture of God, but they only achieved this when they became saints. Our times offer little ground for sanctity. Therefore, rather than cry for the moon, we must do the nearest at hand and fulfill the duties and demands of the day. We do not wish to flee from the world and to despise it as the quietists do, but we do want to master it. All strictly biblical Christians reject mysticism as unchristian because it is removed from nature and life, from the God of the prophets. This reproach does not seem to be unjustified when the mystical experience at its apparent peak changes from the mental into the sensual, as in the bridal mysticism of the priests. Footnote: O Lord, love me much and love me often and long. The more often you love me, the purer I become. The more violently you love me, the more beautiful I become. The longer you love me, the holier I become on earth. Think of how you can fondle my pure soul in your lap. Oh, bring it about, O Lord, even on me. Let me be your soul-bed companion. From Meschelt von Magdeburg. End of footnote. And in the Bhaktas of the Vedanta, they seem to have a clear psychological justification for an ill-considered suppression of all natural drives creates an artificial overstimulation of our feelings which manifest themselves in the transformed behavior of our senses. In this condition, the experience of God becomes a pathological hallucination. This will always happen when the desire for salvation is removed from natural law. The mystics would not think of using meditation for worldly purposes. Indeed, they would be wholly opposed to it. In the Buddhist sense, which never and nowhere has anything to do with mysticism, it represents the fulfillment of striving for salvation, for meditation only begins where world and life are recognized and valued in our own consciousness. Thus, it would be equally wrong to reproach this book for using an immanence in the Buddhist sense instead of the immanent God in the Christian sense. Nothing is used and nothing is assumed. For our goal is neither the unio mystica nor nirvana, but clear self-enlightenment. He who has reached this will find the summum bonum for himself. All psychology is based on self-observation. Even religious psychology cannot advise against it, although no religious psychology can be built on it. To do so, the religious experience of modern man is largely too unproductive, too poor in content, too analytic, and too powerless. However, even if we are lacking in immediate and powerful living piety based on meditation and prayer, we have at least the germs and the beginnings of the true religious experience, and the memories of completely naive expression of piety, especially childhood and youthful memories. We must use these so that, by means of real or hypothetical repetition of these sensations, we may obtain an understanding of this naive piety. Self-observation is an absolutely essential hypothesis for all true religious psychology. He who has never felt his own religious impulse will never be able to penetrate the world of religion, which is so full of wonders and riddles, as per Heiler. This is the only way, O monks, to explain existence, to overcome sadness and grievances, to banish death and misery, to find the right path, to realize nirvana. It is correct meditation. Everything points to this and to this alone. Thus spoke the enlightened. The monks rejoiced at his words. Per Sutta Pitaka. And now we have reached the end of The Secret of Meditation by Hans Ulrich Rieker. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and were able to extract a golden nugget or two. If you know of anyone that could benefit from this content, please share it with them. And yes, subscribe to the channel.